Hello everyone, welcome back to Analog IAS Current Affair Analysis for 2nd June 2021. These are the issues that we'll be dealing today. It's time we define what is and is not sedition, says Supreme Court. This article is in the context of the recent sedition cases which were slapped against media houses in Andhra Pradesh. An MP of the YSRCP party has turned a bitter critique of the party, and he allegedly used casteist slurs and other kinds of provocative statements to actually break down peace in the society as alleged by the ruling party. So this MP has actually used a couple of channels, or there were a couple of channels which actually supported the MP in their criticism against this government. So YSRCP, the ruling party there, and the government has actually slapped sedition cases against the MP and also included the TV channels TV5 and ABN as a part of this entire case. So taking cognizance of this fact, the Supreme Court said that this is not valid because any criticism cannot be termed as sedition. So if you have to take a look at the Indian Penal Code, section 124A speaks about sedition law. Sedition is a crime under this particular section. How do you define sedition? Sedition is an offence committed when any person by words or through speech or through anything that is written or by signs, by visible representation, brings or attempts to bring into hatred or contempt or excites or attempts disaffection towards government, then such an action can be termed as sedition. And the punishment for this is, firstly, it is a non-bailable offence, and punishment under this ranges from a imprisonment of 3 to 7 years, or sometimes it can even be extended to life term also. So if you have to take a look at the major Supreme Court decisions on this particular law, we have to take a look at certain cases which helps us throw some light on the legality of this issue and the scope of this particular sedition law. So if you take a look at the 1950 judgment in the Brij Bhushan versus the state of Delhi, or Ramesh Thapar versus state of Madras, in both these cases the court held that a law which restricted speech on the ground that it would disturb public order was not valid, or it was considered unconstitutional. In 1962, there was another case. This is the famous Kedarnath Singh case. And in this particular Kedarnath Singh case, it did say that sedition is constitutional, but there were certain limitations imposed on the law. What is that limitation? It should lead to violence. Unless and until there is any sort of disturbance of law and order or incitement of violence, then such actions cannot be termed as sedition. Particularly this case distinguished between very strong speech or use of vigorous words, strongly critical of the government, and the actual manifestation of violence. So just because you criticize the government, it doesn't mean that it is sedition. Similarly, if you take a look at the 1995 case, you have the Balwant Singh case. In this Balwant Singh case, the court said that if you are just sloganeering against the government, and if it does not evoke any public response which would lead to damage of public property, then you cannot say that action is sedition. So all these cases point out to the fact that we don't have a clear definition of sedition. And also, if you take a look at the number of cases, in 2019, there were as many as 93 cases of sedition, and just 2 or 3 people were convicted in this particular arrest. So the conviction rate is very low. But what it leads to is probable harassment of those who are critical of the government according to the writers, and also the Supreme Court said that we need to clearly delineate the broad contours of this law and the kind of restrictions that we can impose on the freedom of speech and expression. That is the gist of this article. Breaking the cycle of child labor is in India's hands. Child labor as such is an issue which was existing even before the pandemic. But if you take a look at the statistics from 2000, in the last 15 years, or till 2015, that is till when we have proper data, we can definitely say that the child labor has significantly reduced. A part of this is because of the various initiatives taken up by the governments, and most importantly the Right to Education 2009. So the statistics show that 95% of the kids are definitely enrolled in the schools, at least till primary level. But the real problem starts after the child enters into the secondary school, and the enrollment drops to 79%. In the wake of the pandemic, these numbers, we don't have the data yet, but if you go by preliminary evidence, anecdotal evidence, the number is significantly falling. Just to put things into context, recently Pradham, the survey conducted by Pradham, an NGO, we have the annual survey of education report which speaks about the quality of education. So in the pandemic period, Pradham conducted a survey to understand how many kids had access to this internet and education material, whether it is in the form of books or otherwise. So the shocking result is that only 1/3 of the kids surveyed had access to this material. Digital divide is a big problem in our country. But the bigger problem that we have to worry about is the unemployment rate that is significantly increasing in the country. Since parents were not in a position to afford kids a proper education, these kids are being forced into child labor. We are already witnessing a spike in the child labor cases, and we have to do something about this as soon as possible. So if you go back and take a look at the reasons why child labor has significantly reduced from the year 2000 to 2015, the main reason includes laws like MGNREGA or Manrega, along with Right to Education. The reason why kids are taken into the child labor is because the parents can't afford to give them a proper education. Now, when you make education a right, the state is responsible for paying the fees, and therefore a child gets education as a matter of right. Similarly, parents have a minimum employment through Manrega, which may not be much, but still improves the level of incomes in families. So these kind of interventions have been responsible for decreasing the child labor. But in the present scenario, in the pandemic, we are witnessing a spike in child labor cases because the government expenditure on this specific issue of child labor is very minimal. In fact, in the pandemic, government expenditure is not in tune with what is expected from it, and therefore this is again a case, even from an economic perspective or as a moral imperative towards containing the problem of child labor. The experts are suggesting that government should increase its expenditure. Otherwise, because of the lockdowns, the situation may become so worse that whatever gains we have had in the last 15-20 years would be eroded, and we would be back to square one. Now, how do you handle this issue? In our GS2 syllabus, we have civil society. Now, civil society consists of many stakeholders like NGOs or even corporates through corporate social responsibility. Then there are partners, voluntary organizations, and you also have people, most importantly, people as partners in development. So the very idea of social development must make the entire civil society as a stakeholder in the developmental process. We have certain NGOs which are specialized in child labor containing. In fact, we have Kailash Satyarthi, who through his Bachpan Bachao Andolan, probably organizations like this have much better insight and expertise in dealing with this child labor and bonded labor issue. So it is time that we tap into the expertise of these civil society organizations without looking at them with suspicion. Because if we have to keep our efforts in track in achieving what is called the Sustainable Development Goal 8.7, that is to eliminate all kinds of labor, all kinds of child labor, we have to bring governments, employees, civil society organizations, individuals together in a bid to stop this pandemic, the pandemic of child labor. Otherwise, we would be having a generation that would remain skillless, and we would be losing that window of opportunity to reap into the demographic dividend by the year 2047, because after that we would be entering into an age where there would be more number of dependents rather than actually having a population that is in working age. So keeping this in mind, we have to consider certain steps which would keep us on path to achieve this objective laid down under the SDG goal 8.7 of eliminating child labor and securing the future of our generations. That is the gist of this article.